If you waltz, I'll clean the entire hall tomorrow with a toothbrush. Marko Ivanov's laughter echoed through the ballroom, a rough, cruel sound that cut through the orchestra's soft melody. Every head turned, not to him, the billionaire host in his impeccable suit, but to the woman standing in the shadows near the service doors. Ev Kowalski was 28 and had never imagined her part-time job, cleaning up the messes of the rich to pay for her younger brother's therapies, would end with her, becoming the center of a humiliation spectacle. She remained motionless, the black trash bag still in her hand, her body a statue of neutrality amidst the swirl of silk, jewels, and disdain. Ev's brain didn't process the situation as a social affront, but as an avalanche of data. Marko's laugh frequency, approximately 250 hertz, with peaks of arrogance at 400. The geometric pattern of the Italian marble on the floor, a lattice of perfect squares, the overwhelming scent of dozens of expensive perfumes mixed with spilled champagne, an olfactory assault she needed to compartmentalize and ignore. Beside Marko, his fiancée, Julia Van Dyke, giggled with her delicate hand over her mouth, her eyes sparkling with the same malice. "Oh, Marko, you're terrible," she murmured loud enough for everyone to hear. She probably doesn't even know what a waltz is. Other guests, like industrialist Chang Aziz and heiress Ines Fan, joined the chorus of muffled laughter. They didn't see a person, they saw a prop, an object of momentary entertainment. Ev Kowalski felt the stares like physical needles on her skin. It wasn't fear or shame that paralyzed her, but overload. Her autistic brain, a pattern processing machine, was in overdrive, cataloging every sneering smile, every whisper, every subtle shift in lighting. Instead of panicking, she initiated her internal anchoring routines. She counted the crystal chandeliers, 7, calculated the approximate distance between each, 4.2 meters, and focused on the ternary rhythm of the music the orchestra still played hesitantly. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, the waltz rhythm. It was a pattern, and patterns were Eve's refuge, her native language in a world that spoke in social codes she could never quite decipher. Amir Rees, the cleaning company supervisor, gestured frantically from the shadows, his face pale with dread. His message was clear: disappear, don't cause trouble. But Marko Ivanov wasn't finished. He walked over to her, the scent of expensive whiskey preceding him. "So, what's your answer, darling? Did the cat eat your tongue, or are you too busy calculating your hourly wage?" He leaned in, his face too close, invading her personal space in a way that set off all of Ev's internal alarms. "Come on, entertain us." What he couldn't see was the storm of memories his words triggered. Quick, vivid flashbacks flooded her mind. A small apartment, the scent of dust and lavender, the warm hands of her Polish grandmother, guiding her bare feet on the wooden floor. 1, 2, 3, Ev. Feel the music in your bones. The waltz isn't about steps. It's about math and heart. Another flash, more painful. A competition ballroom in Vienna, at 16. The lights too bright. The sound of the crowd, a shapeless roar. A rival whispering, "Weirdo," as she flapped her hands to calm herself. The world shattered into a million fragments of sound and light. She froze mid-stage. That was the day dance died for her, buried under the weight of prejudice. Now, in that opulent ballroom, a man with the same venom on his lips was trying to bury her again. But something was different. The 16-year-old girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had fought every day against a world not designed for her. A woman who had learned to turn her unique perception from a burden into a tool. Ev's calmness wasn't passivity, it was preparation. She had already seen the signs. The previous week, she had watched Marko humiliate a waiter, young Haru Popovich, for spilling a single drop of wine, forcing him to kneel and clean it with a pocket square. 2 days ago, she had overheard Julia Van Dyke on the phone, referring to the service staff as the Invisibles. They weren't just arrogant. They were cruelly indifferent to the humanity of those who served them. And Ev, with her attention to details others overlooked, had noticed it all. So, slowly, deliberately, she let go of the trash bag. The soft sound of plastic on marble was louder than an explosion in the silent hall. She raised her head and her eyes, an intense analytical gray, met Marko Ivanov's. She said not a word. She simply gave a single firm nod. The challenge was accepted. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marko laughed, delighted. The joke was getting even better than he expected. "Maestro!" he boomed at the orchestra conductor, a nervous man named Louis Katz. "A waltz for our Cinderella here. The prettiest one you have." Louis Katz, whose year-end bonuses depended on Ivanov's generosity, obeyed reluctantly. He raised his baton. Marko stepped away, returning to Julia's side, his phone already in hand, ready to record the impending humiliation and share it with his circle of rich, bored friends. As he walked, he leaned towards Ev and whispered, his voice laced with poison, "Don't forget to clean the marks from your work shoes off my marble when you're done embarrassing yourself." There, before all the scornful eyes, Ev Kowalski stood firm, like someone guarding a secret too powerful to reveal before the right time. What they didn't know was that they weren't mocking a simple maid. They were awakening a forgotten champion, and the ticket price for that spectacle would be the ruin of an empire. If this story of prejudice and overcoming has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because you won't want to miss how the heart math of an autistic woman calculated the most precise and elegant revenge money can't buy. The first note of the Blue Danube Waltz floated through the hall, an ironic invitation to grace in a moment of pure cruelty. Guests backed away, forming a circle around Ev, a modern coliseum where the lioness was a woman in a gray uniform, and the emperor was a billionaire with a smartphone. Marko Ivanov and Julia Von Dijk were in the front row, their faces illuminated by their phone screens, malicious grins ready to capture every stumble, every awkward step. They already imagined the caption, "When the cleaning staff thinks they can attend the ball." The planned humiliation was multifaceted. It wasn't enough to shame her there. They needed to immortalize the moment, turn it into a meme for their exclusive social circle, an anecdote for future dinner parties. The pressure in the air was palpable. Amir Reis, Ev's boss, looked on the verge of collapse, making pleading gestures from the shadows, begging her to simply flee. Her colleague, the young and frightened Catalina Gonzalez, watched with wide eyes, a mixture of terror for her friend and a spark of rebellious hope. For everyone there, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. An awkward, likely overwhelmed and scared maid would make a ridiculous spectacle, and the night would continue. They completely underestimated the woman at the center of the circle. For Ev, the outside world began to fade. The sensory overload, which had threatened to drown her before, was being channeled. Her brain, in an act of self-preservation and supreme concentration, began to filter out the noise. The sneering faces became unimportant blurs. The weight of hundreds of gazes transformed into irrelevant ambient pressure. Only the pure elements remained: space, time, and music. The pattern: 1, 2, 3. She closed her eyes for a brief second, not in fear, but in calibration. She visualized the ballroom not as a place of judgment, but as a Cartesian plane. She was the origin point. Each step would be a precise coordinate. Each turn, an exercise in rotational physics. She took the first step. It was hesitant, small, almost timid. A collective sigh of laughter rippled through the hall. It was exactly what they expected. Marko zoomed in with his phone camera, wanting to capture the exact moment she lost her balance. But the second step was firmer. The third, perfectly on time. Her posture, once that of an employee trying to be invisible, began to transform. Her back straightened, her shoulders pulled back, her head lifted. She wasn't trying to imitate the dancers she had observed. She was executing a form she knew intimately, a language her body hadn't forgotten. The heavy work shoes and restrictive uniform were undoubtedly obstacles, but Ev's past had prepared her for far greater challenges. She remembered training for hours with weights on her ankles to strengthen her legs. She remembered practicing on the uneven floors of community gyms. Those difficulties had forged a resilient technique, not dependent on perfect conditions. Her body, guided by a muscle memory buried under years of trauma, began to move with a fluidity that shocked the crowd into silence. Her turns weren't flamboyant, but they were impeccable. Her center of gravity perfectly controlled. Her arms, instead of hanging awkwardly by her sides, took on the classic ballroom frame, as if holding an invisible partner. Marko Ivanov's smirk faltered. This was not what he had planned. The clown wasn't being funny. She was being magnificent. The crowd sensed the shift. The murmurs of mockery were replaced by murmurs of awe. The phones that had been pulled out to jeer were now recording with reluctant admiration. Among the guests, one man watched with a different intensity. Theodore Hansen was not an industrialist or an heir. He was an investigative journalist who had managed to get an invitation to the event to observe Ivanov's inner circle for a piece on corporate philanthropy. He had seen the initial cruelty, and now he saw the extraordinary turnaround. He saw not just a good story, he saw an injustice being challenged in real time. Marco, feeling the control of the situation slipping through his fingers, became enraged. The crowd's admiration was for him, not his cleaning staff. In a fit of childish spite, he strode over to the orchestra, and with a sharp gesture and a withering look at Maestro Louis Katz, signaled them to speed up. The message was clear. If Grace hadn't brought her down, perhaps speed would. Louis Katz swallowed hard but obeyed his patron. The baton quickened and Strauss's serene waltz turned into a frenetic whirlwind. The tempo doubled, becoming almost impossible to follow for an amateur dancer. The intention was obvious. Make her stumble, fall, and finally give Marco the moment of humiliation he so craved. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the inevitable disaster. But they, and Marco, made the fundamental mistake of judging Eve by what they thought she was, not by what she truly was. To a neurotypical mind, the accelerated music was chaotic. To Eve's mind, it was simply a new set of data to be processed more quickly. Her focus narrowed to a needle point. The entire world became the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, faster and faster, not as chaos, but as a denser mathematical sequence. And she kept up. Not just kept up, she flourished. Her feet moved in a precise blur over the marble. Her turns became faster, tighter, a display of balance and core strength that would impress an Olympic athlete. What was meant to be her downfall became her stage. The look of panic on the maestro's face was visible as he tried to keep up with his own hands. But Eve was perfectly synchronized with the musical storm Marco had unleashed. Every new planned humiliation only strengthened something within her that her oppressors couldn't see. A silent force being fueled by injustice itself. They thought they were accelerating her fall, but in reality, they were just forcing her to reveal the speed of her true, forgotten genius. The chaotic waltz reached its climax, and with a final flourish from the orchestra, the music stopped abruptly. In the center of the hall, Eve Kowalski completed one last turn and stopped in a perfect pose, one hand elegantly extended, the other over her heart. She wasn't panting. Her face was serene, her eyes clear and focused. The silence that followed was profound, dense, laden with awe and collective embarrassment. For a long moment no one moved. The spell was broken by a single sound of applause. Theodore Hansen, the journalist, was on his feet, clapping slowly, his eyes fixed on Eve with unwavering respect. His solitary applause was like permission. Soon, another joined in, and then another, and within seconds, the hall erupted into a thunderous ovation, a sonic wave of admiration that washed away the sordidness of the previous moment. The people who had laughed were now applauding fervently, perhaps to distance themselves from their own complicity. Marco Ivanov's face was a mask of contorted fury. His entertainment piece had become the hero of the night. His power, his ability to control and humiliate, had evaporated before everyone's eyes. In his mind, she hadn't just challenged him. She had stolen from him. Stolen the attention, the admiration, the narrative control. Blinded by rage, he made his final and gravest mistake. He marched across the hall, ignoring the applause, and roughly grabbed Eve's arm. "You think this makes you special?" He spat, his voice low and venomous. "You're still the maid. The show's over. Get back to the trash." He tried to pull her out of the spotlight, to drag her back into the shadows from whence she came, to physically reassert his dominance. The crowd recoiled, shocked by the open aggression. But before he could drag her an inch, a figure stepped between them. "Mr. Ivanov." Theodore Hansen's voice was calm, but had a steely edge. He held his phone aloft, the red recording light blinking prominently. "Could you comment on the extraordinary performance we just witnessed?" And perhaps on your tactics of physically intimidating your employees at a charity event? Hansen's presence and his camera acted like a bucket of cold water. Marco dropped Ev's arm as if it were on fire. He looked at the camera lens, and for the first time that night, a flicker of genuine panic appeared in his eyes. He was no longer dealing with a silent maid, but with the press. "Who the hell are you? Security!" he yelled. "Get this man out of my house!" But the damage was already done. Theodore wasn't alone. Dozens of other phones had captured the aggression. Ev's preparation hadn't been a secret plan formulated over weeks. It was a strategy executed in minutes, using her mind as the only weapon. While she danced, her analytical mind wasn't just focused on the steps. She was scanning the room, observing who was recording, who was laughing the loudest, who looked shocked. She noticed Theodore Hansen, saw the way he moved, not as a guest but as an observer. She knew her dance was the bait, the performance that would create the evidence. She didn't need a lawyer or a complicated revenge plan. She just needed to be herself in her fullness and let Marco's arrogance do the rest. Eve's plan unfolded in real time. The dance was Act 1, which turned mockery into admiration and isolated Marco. His violent reaction was Act 2, irrefutable proof of his tyrannical nature. And Act 3 was about to begin. Theodore Hansen was not ejected. He blended into the crowd, already sending the video to his newsroom with an urgent note. "Change the agenda. I have the story of the night." While Marco's security tried to control the situation, Ev, with supernatural calm, simply turned and walked towards the service doors. She didn't look back. Her colleague, Catalina Gonzalez, ran to meet her, her eyes filled with tears of admiration. "Ev, you were amazing." Ev just nodded, her nervous system finally beginning to process the end of the overload. She picked up the trash bag she had left on the floor. For her, the work wasn't over yet. But as she passed Amir Reese, her terrified supervisor, he didn't say a word. He just looked at her with a new kind of respect, mixed with the fear of one who realizes they have gravely underestimated a force of nature. For a moment, when Marco grabbed her, everyone thought humiliation would finally win. But they hadn't counted on the power of a witness and the fact that Ev's dance wasn't the main act. It was just the opening for the real performance. The meticulously planned destruction of an empire built on arrogance. The waltz was over, but the symphony of justice was just beginning its first movement. Justice's execution didn't come with a bang, but with the click of a publish button. Before the last guest had even left Marco Ivanov's mansion, Theodore Hansen's article was live, emblazoned on the homepage of one of the country's most respected news portals. The headline was devastating in its simplicity. "The Waltz of Shame, Billionaire Marco Ivanov humiliates and assaults employee at charity gala." The article wasn't just a description of the incident. It was a masterpiece of contextual journalism. Theodore's high-quality video showed everything: Marco's cruel wager, the mockery of Julia Van Dyke and the other guests, Ev's mesmerizing dance, the order to speed up the music, and the ugly climax of the physical assault. But Hansen went further. Using the incident as a starting point, he connected it to a pattern of behavior. Within hours, he had secured anonymous testimonies from former Ivanov Corp employees, including one from Haru Popovich, the humiliated waiter, and another from a former assistant, Sujin Kiknadze, who described a toxic work environment governed by fear and intimidation. The internet exploded. The #Waltz of Shame began trending globally on Twitter. Eve's dance video, lifted from Hansen's article and dozens of other guests' phones, went viral. But people weren't just sharing the beauty of her dance. They were sharing the ugliness of Marco's behavior. Corporations sponsoring the charity event were inundated with messages from furious customers. Luxury brands that used Marco as an ambassador began seeing their social media feeds flooded with comments demanding they cut ties with him. Panic set in Marco Ivanov's world. He woke up the next morning not as a master of the universe but as a public villain. His public relations team tried to issue a statement, a pathetic mix of vague apologies about a misinterpreted joke and excessive alcohol. It was like throwing a glass of water on a wildfire. The internet tore him apart, dissecting every hypocritical word. Screenshots of old emails leaked by Sujin Kiknadze to Hansen showed Marco referring to his employees with derogatory terms. The narrative was out of his control completely. Julia Van Dyke, sensing the ship was sinking, abandoned him in the most public way possible. She posted a lengthy Instagram statement, alongside a solemn-looking photo of herself, proclaiming to be heartbroken and shocked by Marco's unacceptable behavior, announcing the end of their engagement and that she would be making a substantial donation to a charity supporting workers' rights. It was a self-preservation act, so transparent it was almost comical. But for Marco, it was another devastating blow. The hardest blow, however, was financial. The board of directors of Ivanov Corp, composed of figures like the cautious Henry Kara and the pragmatic Hanna Sokolov-Lloyd, convened an emergency meeting. The company's stock had plummeted 30% at market open. They didn't care about the morality of what Marco had done, but they cared deeply about profits. Facing a shareholder revolt and the threat of mass boycotts, the decision was unanimous and brutal. Marco Ivanov was forced to resign as CEO of his own company, the company his grandfather founded. He was ousted with a generous but stripped-down exit package, devoid of what he valued most: his power, his title, his status. As his world crumbled, Eve Kowalski remained in dignified silence. She gave no interviews. She did not respond to the thousands of messages of support that flooded a newly created social media account by Catalina Gonzalez in her name. She simply sent, through Theodore Hansen, a formal and polite letter of resignation to the cleaning company. Her refusal to engage in the media circus made her position even more powerful. She wasn't a victim seeking sympathy. She was a woman who had asserted her dignity and moved on. Her action was the dance. The rest was just the echo. A week later, as news channels showed Marco being caught by paparazzi, looking dejected and furious as he left his former office, another story began to emerge. A video of Eve's dance had reached the attention of Agnieszka Nguyen, the legendary artistic director of the Vienna State Ballet, the very city where Eve's dream had died years before. Agnieszka saw not just a good dancer, she saw a movement genius, a woman who understood the mathematical structure of dance in a way she rarely saw. An offer was made, a full scholarship for Eve to join the academy, not as a student, but as a trainee choreographer, a special program created just for her. The news spread, a poetic counterpoint to Marco's fall. As masks dropped and Marco Ivanov's empire turned to dust, one question remained. What happens when the person you tried to crush is given the wings you never knew she had? Justice had been served, but Eve Kowalski's story, the real story, was just beginning. A year later, Marco Ivanov's name was little more than a footnote in articles about corporate scandals, an example of how arrogance in the digital age can lead to a meteoric fall. He was still wealthy, but it was a hollow, lonely kind of wealth. Money couldn't buy back his reputation, his sycophantic friends, or the empire that bore his name. He lived reclusively in his now silent mansion, the ballroom a vast, dusty mausoleum for his own arrogance. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand in the middle of the cold marble, the echo of the Blue Danube waltz playing only in his haunted memory. He would see the ghost of a woman in a gray uniform, spinning with a grace he tried to destroy, not realizing that by doing so he had only destroyed himself. He lost everything that defined his identity: power, admiration, and control. The hall he threatened to make Eve clean with a toothbrush became his prison. In contrast, Eve Kowalski's name shone. In Vienna, she not only accepted the scholarship, she redefined what was possible in choreography. Her approach was unlike anything the classical dance world had ever seen. Using her autistic perception of patterns, she created ballets that were visually stunning and emotionally profound. She saw the interaction of bodies on stage not as drama, but as complex systems of geometry and movement, finding emotion in the purity of form. Her first major production, titled Patterns of Silence, was a resounding success. Critics praised her unique choreographic voice and her ability to find order in chaos and beauty in structure. She didn't become a celebrity in the traditional sense. Eve was notoriously private, preferring the quiet of the dance studio to the glare of the spotlight. She gave few interviews, and when she did, it was always with Theodore Hansen, who had become a trusted friend and confidant. Theodore, in turn, won a journalism award for his coverage of the Ivanov scandal, which he always referred to as Eve's story. He used his newfound platform to launch a series of reports on working conditions in the service industries, giving a voice to the invisibles Ev had represented that night. Catalina Gonzalez, Ev's loyal friend, received a job offer to manage Ev's schedule and day-to-day affairs, a position of trust that took her out of the cleaning company forever. Together, the two established the Kowalski Foundation for Neurodiverse Arts, a nonprofit organization offering dance, music, and visual arts classes in sensory-friendly environments for children and young people on the autism spectrum. It was Eve's legacy, far more significant than any award or positive review. It was proof that one's unique perception of the world was not a disadvantage but a strength to be celebrated. The final resolution wasn't a confrontation, but a divergence of destinies. Marco withered in his past, while Ev built a future. The validation of Ev's moral triumph came from the most unexpected places. Young dancers worldwide began posting videos attempting to replicate her viral moves, not with mockery, but with admiration. Parents of autistic children wrote to her, telling her how her story gave them hope. She became a silent yet powerful symbol that dignity cannot be taken away, only asserted. Her story served as a potent moral lesson. True strength lies not in dominating others, but in mastering oneself. Arrogance builds sandcastles, ready to be swept away by the tide of truth. Ev didn't seek revenge. She sought authenticity. By daring to be fully herself, in a world that demanded she be less, she didn't just win a bet. She rewrote the rules of the TA game. And you? What would you do if the world tried to put you in a box? Have you ever faced a situation where your unique ability was seen as a weakness? Leave in the comments how you turned a challenge into your greatest strength. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice that remind us that sometimes the best response to hate isn't a word, but a perfectly executed dance. He tried to destroy Ev, but ended up destroying himself. Ev learned that true revenge isn't about reciprocating the harm suffered. It's about achieving a success your enemies could never have imagined.